For 7 years, I woke up in pain, not knowing why. My body felt like it was betraying me, and the doctors couldn't give me any answers. I thought I was losing my mind. But today, I'm here to share my story. If you've ever felt like life is unraveling without explanation, if you've faced betrayal, this is for you. Please take a moment to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps others hear this message of hope. Together, we can remind each other that we're never alone in our struggles. I was born in 1942 in a small town in Kentucky, Pine Ridge, a place where everyone knew your name and your neighbors were like family. My father worked in the coal mines, and my mother took care of me and my 5 siblings. It was a simple life, but we didn't know anything else. I remember the smell of fresh bread baking, the sound of my father's boots on the front porch after a long day's work. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. When I was young, I was filled with dreams of what my future could be. Life was a series of small, joyful moments. Picking wildflowers by the stream, helping my mother with the garden, and sitting around the kitchen table where we laughed and shared our days. We didn't have much in the way of material things, but we had love, we had family, and that was all we needed to make a life worth living. At 19, I met Gerald at a church social. He was handsome, tall, and had a smile that could light up the room. Everyone in town said I was lucky. Gerald worked at the textile factory, a solid, respectable job. We got engaged after just 6 months of courting. It felt right, like something meant to be. I remember our wedding day like it was yesterday. It wasn't a grand affair, just a simple ceremony at the church, but it was perfect. We had the whole future ahead of us, and nothing seemed impossible. We moved into a small house by the factory, a blue 2-story with white windows. I took pride in making it our home. Every morning, I would pack Gerald's lunch, sending him off with a kiss, and then I would tend to the house, making sure everything was in its place. We had no children at first, but we didn't mind. There was always something to keep us busy. Fixing the fence, tending to the garden, talking about our hopes and dreams for the future. It was the kind of life I had always wanted. Peaceful, simple, and full of love. Those early years with Gerald were the happiest I'd known. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had time. Time to sit by the fire at night, sipping tea and talking about our day. Time to dream about the children we would have, the house we would build, the life we would create together. I thought it would always be this way. Simple, quiet, content. As time passed, Gerald's work at the factory brought more responsibilities, and I was proud of him. He worked hard, and it showed. He got promoted, moved up the ranks, and soon was spending more time at work. He was always on the go. Business dinners, trips to Chicago, the long hours that came with success. It was different, but I supported him, always. I believed in him. We had a good life, and I thought surely we would continue this way. There was nothing that could break the bond we had, I told myself. The first signs of something changing came so slowly, I didn't even notice them at first. My legs would ache, my joints would feel stiff. I'd wake up feeling tired, like I hadn't slept at all, but I kept going. I blamed it on the housework, or maybe just getting older. It wasn't much. Just small discomforts here and there. Nothing I couldn't handle. At least that's what I told myself. But looking back, I can see it now. Those little aches were the first whispers of a much bigger storm that would come. I didn't know it then, but the life I had so carefully built would soon start to unravel, bit by bit, until I was left with nothing but questions. Questions that no one had answers for. At the time, though, I was happy. I had everything I ever wanted. A loving husband, a home I cherished, a life I had worked hard to build. It was simple. It was beautiful. And I thought it would never change. But that was before the pain started, before everything I knew began to shift in a way I couldn't understand. Before the life I had been so proud of was turned upside down by something I couldn't explain. And I didn't know then that this would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my life. But for now, I had hope. I had Gerald, I had my home, and I had the future we'd planned together. It was all I needed. The pain started so subtly at first that I hardly noticed it. It was just a dull ache in my fingers when I'd wake up in the morning. A stiffness that would go away after a few minutes of moving around. I thought it was nothing more than getting older, maybe a little stress from the housework, or from trying to keep up with Gerald's long hours. After all, he worked hard to provide for us, and I didn't want to burden him with complaints. But it didn't stop. The aches grew stronger. I woke up with sore legs, like I'd been running all night. I'd try to shake it off, telling myself it was just from doing too much around the house. But after a while, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was tired all the time, too tired to even enjoy the things I used to love. I'd sit at the kitchen table, trying to muster the energy to start the day, and all I wanted to do was go back to bed. It didn't make sense. I was still young, wasn't I? At least, that's what I kept telling myself. One day, I finally said something to Gerald. "I'm not feeling quite right, dear. My legs hurt. My arms are so stiff. Maybe I should see the doctor." He gave me a small smile and patted my hand. "You're just worn out, Ellie. Don't worry about it. You've been working hard." He was right, of course. I had been busy. The house needed tending to, and there was always something to do. So I brushed it off, thinking it would pass. But it didn't. The pain persisted. It spread from my joints to my muscles, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like my body was betraying me, and I didn't know why. But I kept it to myself, too proud to admit how bad it had gotten. Finally, I made an appointment with Dr. Paul, the town doctor. He'd been the one who had delivered me when I was born, and I trusted him. I sat in his office, telling him about the pain in my joints, the weakness in my legs. He listened to me, nodding slowly. After a quick examination, he said, "It's probably nothing, Eleanor. You're just a little run down. Your body's been through a lot, but there's nothing physically wrong with you. Maybe it's just stress." He prescribed me some painkillers and sent me on my way. I didn't feel reassured. But I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe it was stress. I had been feeling a little overwhelmed. Gerald was working late more often, and I was left to manage everything around the house on my own. But still, the pain didn't go away. It lingered, nagging at me like a constant reminder that something wasn't right. As the weeks passed, I went back to Dr. Paul. The pain was still there, and now it was getting worse. But again, he told me it was nothing serious. "You just need to take it easy, Ellie," he said. "You've been taking on too much. Maybe you need a little vacation." But I didn't feel like I needed a vacation. I needed answers. I needed someone to tell me what was happening to my body. I started to notice Gerald becoming distant. He wasn't as concerned as I thought he should be. He would come home late from work, often with a quiet, distracted air about him. When I mentioned the pain, he would just nod and tell me I needed rest. But he didn't seem to really listen. I wanted to talk to him about how I was feeling, but something about the way he looked at me, almost impatient, made me hold back. I didn't want to burden him more. There were nights when I would lie awake in bed, my body aching from head to toe, and I'd listen to Gerald's steady breathing beside me. I wanted to reach out to him, to ask for help, but I didn't. I kept it inside, thinking maybe it was just me. Maybe I was overreacting, or maybe this was just what getting older felt like. But as the days went by, the pain grew, and so did the silence between us. I started noticing things, small things, that I hadn't before. Gerald would come home late more often, and when he did, he seemed distant. He was always tired, and sometimes he wouldn't even greet me when he walked through the door. It was subtle at first, just little things that made me wonder if he was starting to pull away. I didn't want to believe it. But the truth was starting to nag at me. Looking back, I see it now. The first cracks in the foundation of our marriage were starting to show, not because of anything we had done wrong, but because something was beginning to slip away, little by little, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Not yet. But there I was, day after day, waking up in pain, pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was scared. Scared of the pain that was slowly taking over my body. Scared that I was losing control of my own life. At this point, I didn't know what was coming next. But I had no idea that these small aches, these small signs, would soon be the beginning of something much bigger. Something I would never be able to ignore. For now, I still held on to the hope that it was nothing. Just a passing phase. But deep down, a quiet voice told me otherwise. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. I went back to Dr. Paul several times. At first I thought maybe I was just imagining things, or that I was exaggerating. But as the weeks passed, the pain became worse. It wasn't just my joints anymore. It spread to my muscles, my bones. Every step felt like I was dragging a weight behind me. Every morning, I'd wake up with stiffness in places I didn't even know existed. My hands trembled when I tried to do the simplest tasks, like holding a cup of tea or buttoning my blouse. The pain was constant, gnawing at me from every direction. But no one seemed to take me seriously. I remember the day I went to Dr. Paul again, desperate for an answer. I sat there holding back tears, explaining that the pain wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was unbearable. "I can't live like this anymore, doctor," I told him. "It hurts to move, it hurts to breathe. Something's wrong." He listened, nodding as he scribbled something in his notes. And then he looked up at me. His face was kind, but his words were not. "You just need to rest, Eleanor. Maybe you're stressed. I'd recommend taking it easy. Try not to worry so much." I wanted to scream. How could he say that? How could he dismiss what I was feeling? He handed me another prescription for painkillers and sent me on my way, just like the last time. But the pills didn't work. They never worked. The pain just kept getting worse, and I kept feeling more and more like I was losing my mind. The next few visits were the same. I went to different doctors, hoping for a new perspective. But it was always the same response. They'd take a quick look, maybe run a blood test, and tell me there was nothing physically wrong with me. "It's just nerves," one doctor said. "It's all in your head," another claimed. "Try some physical therapy," one suggested. But nothing they gave me helped. The pain never went away. I felt like a ghost of myself, slipping through the cracks. One afternoon, after yet another round of dismissals, I sat in the doctor's office, my hands clenched in my lap, trying not to cry. "I'm telling you," I said, This is not in my head. This pain is real. Please listen to me." The doctor just looked at me with a tired expression. "Eleanor," he said, "it's a common condition for women your age. You're probably just experiencing some mild arthritis, some wear and tear. You need to relax." I left that office feeling smaller than when I'd walked in. I was losing my sense of self, my trust in my own body. The pain was real, I knew it. But the more I tried to explain it, the more I felt like no one believed me. I started to doubt myself. Was it really that bad? Was I overreacting? Maybe I was just imagining it after all. Maybe they were right. But how could I be imagining something that took away my ability to do the simplest things? How could I be imagining the way I struggled to get out of bed, the way my legs would buckle beneath me, or the way my body ached all over? I couldn't remember the last time I woke up without pain. I couldn't remember the last time I didn't feel like something inside me was falling apart, but no one listened. Gerald, too, started to get impatient with me. At first, he was understanding. He took me to the doctors, helped me with the housework when I couldn't manage. But as time went on, his patience wore thin. I'd complain about the pain, and he'd just look at me with that tired expression. "Maybe you just need to get out more," he would say, his voice strained. "You're always sitting around here resting. You need to keep busy, Ellie. You need to distract yourself." His words stung, but I didn't say anything. What could I say? I felt like I was falling apart, but I didn't know how to make anyone understand. I tried to push through it. I kept going, day after day, pretending I was fine, even when every part of me screamed in agony. But the more I tried to be strong, the more it felt like I was breaking inside. I started to feel like I was losing control of everything. My body, my life, my marriage. The pain was always there, and no one cared. They just told me to push through it, to take more pills, to go to another doctor, but none of it helped. And I began to wonder, was there something wrong with me? Had I imagined it all? I began to question everything. The doubts crept in like a slow poison. Maybe I was just too sensitive. Maybe I was making it all up. Maybe everyone was right and this was all just in my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew the pain was real. I just didn't know who to turn to. Who would believe me? By then, I was so lost in the pain, so exhausted from fighting it, that I stopped trying to explain it. I stopped seeking answers. I didn't know where to go anymore. I didn't know what to do. And that's when I started to realize how truly alone I was in this. I was surrounded by people who didn't understand, people who couldn't see the truth of what I was going through. It wasn't just the pain, it was the silence, the loneliness that came with it. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let the pain win. Not yet. I had to keep going. Even though I had no answers, even though no one believed me, I had to keep fighting. The pain didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. My fingers felt like they were frozen, and every step felt like my legs were dragging through mud. There were mornings when I could barely get out of bed, and by the time I made it to the kitchen, I was exhausted. But no one seemed to care. Not the doctors, not Gerald. I felt like I was disappearing, fading away in front of their eyes. Gerald was changing too. At first he was so attentive, so concerned. He'd take me to the doctor, help with the house when I couldn't. But lately he'd been coming home late, later than usual. Some nights he wouldn't get home until long after I had already gone to bed, and when he did, he was distant. He'd barely say a word, just sit at the table, eat his dinner, and go to bed. He didn't ask how I was doing anymore. He didn't ask about the pain. It wasn't just the late nights. He started to look at me differently, like I was a burden. When I complained about the pain, he would sigh, a long, heavy sigh, and say, "You just need to rest more, Ellie. You're always complaining. It's nothing." He said it so casually, like my suffering was just an inconvenience. It hurt. It really hurt. I wanted to shout at him, to ask why he didn't care. Why wasn't he worried about me? But I kept it to myself, afraid of making things worse. I tried to talk to him about it once, when he came home early, but it didn't go the way I expected. I told him how bad the pain was getting, how I could barely move some days. I told him I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. He just looked at me and shook his head. "You're just tired," he said. "Take some more of those pills the doctor gave you. Stop overthinking it, that was it. No sympathy, no concern. Just dismissal." He didn't even try to understand. It started to gnaw at me. Something wasn't right. Gerald had always been good to me, kind even when times were tough. But now it was like he didn't care. And those late nights, they bothered me. He'd tell me he was working late, but I didn't believe him. Why didn't he call? Why didn't he text? Why was he spending more and more time away from me? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I began to wonder if maybe there was someone else. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was so caught up in my own pain that I hadn't noticed the distance growing between us. I'd see him come home smelling like cologne, like he'd been out somewhere. He would walk through the door and give me a quick kiss on the cheek, then disappear into the bathroom to change. He never used to be like that. We used to talk when he came home, even if it was just about the day. But now he was always in a rush, always distracted. I couldn't help it. My heart began to race every time I saw him walk through the door. What was going on? Why was he avoiding me? Why did he seem so distant? And the nights? Those long, lonely nights. I would lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards when he got up, the sound of him moving around in the kitchen after I had already gone to bed. What was he doing there? Why was he sneaking around when I was asleep? The more I thought about it, the more it ate at me. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something else going on, but I was too afraid to confront it. What if I was wrong? What if I was imagining things? I didn't want to accuse him of something I couldn't prove, especially when I was already so confused about what was happening to my own body. But the doubts kept creeping in. Every night I would wait for him to come home, wondering if he would walk through the door at the usual time, or if it would be another late night. And every night, I felt more and more like I was losing him, like something was slipping through my fingers, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on, I couldn't stop it. I wanted to ask him about it. I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth. But I couldn't bring myself to. What if he denied it? What if he said I was just imagining things, just like everyone else had? What if I was wrong? What if he was just tired, just stressed like I had been for so long? But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My body was failing me, my husband was pulling away, and I didn't know how to fix it. I was afraid. Afraid to ask the questions, afraid of what the answers might be. So I kept it to myself, kept pretending everything was fine, even though my world was slowly unraveling around me. And all the while, the pain grew. It spread from my fingers to my arms, from my legs to my back. Every day it was harder to get up, harder to breathe, harder to go on. But no one saw it. No one could see how much I was hurting, because all they saw was the woman who was still trying to smile, still trying to keep up appearances. No one saw the woman who was slowly being consumed by pain and doubt. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing. Something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. It was the strangest thing, but it wasn't until Mrs. Clark moved in next door that I began to feel like someone understood. Mrs. Clark was different from everyone else in the neighborhood. She was a widow, older than me, with a sharp mind and a heart full of kindness. I had heard whispers about her. People in town would talk about her unconventional ways, how she wore pants when everyone else wore dresses, how she smoked on the porch and read books on Sundays. But to me, she was a breath of fresh air in a town where everyone else seemed to have their own opinions about my life. I remember the first time we spoke. It was a warm afternoon, and I was in my front yard trying to water the flowers, though honestly my hands were too stiff to hold the hose for long. She came over to introduce herself, her smile wide and easy. "I've been meaning to stop by," she said, her voice smooth like velvet. I'm Mrs. Clark. I live next door. We started talking about the weather, about the neighborhood. But soon, she asked the question I hadn't expected. How are you, Eleanor? Really, how are you? Something about her question felt different. She wasn't asking out of politeness. She was asking like she genuinely cared. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was being brushed off. So I told her. I told her about the pain that was taking over my body, about the visits to the doctors, the pills, and the constant feeling that something was terribly wrong, but no one seemed to listen. To my surprise, Mrs. Clark didn't dismiss me like the others. She didn't tell me I was imagining it, or that it was all in my head. She just listened. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel crazy. Mrs. Clark nodded as I spoke, her eyes full of understanding. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer any quick fixes or empty reassurances. When I finished, she simply said, "That's a lot to carry, Eleanor. But I've learned something over the years. Sometimes the answers are closer to home than we think." She smiled kindly and added, "Have you ever considered that the source of your pain might be closer to home than you think?" I remember how her words hung in the air like a question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. What did she mean? Closer to home? I thought about it for a moment, my mind racing with all the possibilities. What could she mean by that? But before I could ask her to explain, she continued, "Keep track of your symptoms, Eleanor. Write them down. Pay attention to when the pain gets worse, when it feels different. Maybe you'll see something others have missed." At first, I wasn't sure if it would help, but something in the way Mrs. Clark said it made me want to try. So I did. Every day I wrote down how I felt, what time the pain started, how long it lasted, what I was doing when it intensified. I kept track of everything. At first, I didn't think it would make much of a difference, but then I started to notice something. The pain always seemed to be worse after certain nights when Gerald came home late. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as the days went by, I realized that the pain was particularly unbearable the mornings after Gerald had been out late, sometimes not returning until the early hours of the morning. It was as though my body was reacting to something I couldn't see but could feel. The more I tracked it, the more the pattern became clear. The days when Gerald was home at a normal hour were easier. I could get out of bed without much trouble, walk to the kitchen without feeling like my legs were made of stone. But when he came home late, the pain would be unbearable. Some days it was as if my body was punishing me. It wasn't just fatigue anymore. It was a deep, aching pain that wouldn't go away. I sat down one evening after writing it all down, and a chill ran through me. What if Mrs. Clark was right? What if the source of my pain wasn't just stress or aging? What if something else was going on? Something that had nothing to do with my health and everything to do with what was happening when I wasn't looking? I remember the feeling that settled in my chest. Cold, uneasy, like the floor had dropped out from under me. What was Gerald doing? Why was he staying out so late? Why did the pain seem to follow him like a shadow? I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. Something was wrong. But even now, even with all the signs pointing to something being off, I was afraid to ask him. What if I was wrong? What if I was imagining it all? I had to find out the truth, but I wasn't sure how. Mrs. Clark kept checking in on me, asking about my progress, listening to my fears without judgment. I think in a way she knew I was starting to suspect something, but she never pushed me. She just gave me the space to figure it out on my own, and for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. But that feeling of unease, the one Mrs. Clark had planted in my heart, stayed with me. The pain kept growing, and so did my fear. I didn't know how to face the truth, but I knew I had to. Something was happening, and it was time to find out what it was. With Mrs. Clark's encouragement, I started writing everything down. Every ache, every stiffness, every twinge of pain. At first, It felt like a pointless exercise, like I was grasping at something that didn't exist. But as the days went by, I began to notice a pattern. The pain would come and go, but it was always worse after certain nights. Nights when Gerald came home later than usual. It wasn't just the pain, it was the exhaustion that followed, the heaviness in my limbs that made it hard to move. Something about those nights felt different, like my body was reacting to something, but I couldn't understand why. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pain was no longer just physical. It was emotional, too. Each time Gerald came home late, I felt a pang of fear in my chest, like I was waiting for something I couldn't quite name. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was starting to add up. So, one night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, in pain and in doubt. I had to know the truth. Gerald had been giving me a sedative every night to help me sleep. He said it would relax me, help me forget the pain. But what if he was using it to keep me from seeing something? What if I was being drugged, kept in the dark about what was really going on? I decided to stop taking the sedative. I hid the pill in my hand, pretending to swallow it. But I didn't. For the first time in months, I stayed awake, watching, listening. Gerald came to bed at his usual time, bringing the glass of warm milk with the pill as he always did. He didn't notice that I didn't take it. I pretended to fall asleep, my heart racing in my chest. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything to happen. The house was silent. I could hear his breathing steady beside me, the soft rustle of his sheets as he shifted. I kept my eyes half closed, pretending to be asleep, but inside I was alert, watching. I waited. And then, in the dead of night, I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. The soft creak of the floorboards, the sound of someone getting up. It was Gerald. I heard him moving around the room, and then the faint click of the door as he opened it, creeping out into the darkened house. My heart skipped a beat. What was he doing? Where was he going? I lay still, barely breathing, as I listened to the sounds of him moving downstairs. There was something about it, something off. I had never heard him get up in the middle of the night like this before. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't shake. What was he doing when I was asleep? Why was he sneaking around? I had to know. I couldn't just lie there anymore. I got out of bed as quietly as I could, careful not to make a sound. My legs were weak, but I managed to steady myself as I tiptoed to the stairs. I stayed low, my heart pounding in my chest, and I crept down the hallway, trying not to make any noise. From the shadows, I watched him. He was in the kitchen, standing by the cabinet where we kept the cleaning supplies. I saw him pull out a small bottle from the back of the cabinet. It was dark, and I couldn't see the label, but I didn't need to. I saw his hand shake slightly as he unscrewed the cap and poured something into the cup that I used every morning for coffee. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, my eyes locked on him. He didn't notice me standing there hidden in the dark. My heart pounded in my chest, my body trembling as I watched him carefully mix whatever it was into the cup. He looked around, making sure no one was watching, before turning and heading back upstairs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. What was he doing? What had I just witnessed? My body shook with the realization that I had seen something I could never unsee. Gerald, the man I had trusted with my life, was poisoning me. Slowly. Night after night, he had been feeding me something, and I had no idea. I had been blind, so focused on the pain that I never saw what was right in front of me. I stayed there for a moment, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I couldn't move, couldn't process what I had just seen. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't just some random illness. This was deliberate. This was betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there frozen before I finally moved. I crept back up the stairs, my legs unsteady, my thoughts a blur. I got back into bed and pretended to sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I could still see him, standing in the kitchen, pouring that liquid into my cup. My hands were shaking and my body felt like it was on fire. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen it sooner? But now I knew. I knew the truth. And nothing would ever be the same again. That night, after what I had seen in the kitchen, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. My mind was racing, my heart was pounding, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gerald pouring that liquid into my cup. It was as if the entire world had shifted beneath my feet. The man I had trusted with everything, my life, my health, my love, had been lying to me, had been poisoning me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend I didn't know what I had seen. The truth was there, right in front of me, but I was terrified. Terrified of what it meant. Terrified of how I should confront him. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything. My body felt cold, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. Gerald had always been a good man, at least I thought he was. He had been my partner, my best friend, but now I wasn't sure who he was. What had I missed? Had he always been like this? Or was this something new, something dark I had never seen before? The questions kept swirling in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't ignore it anymore. But what was I supposed to do? What could I do? I thought about all the times I had looked away, all the times I had brushed off my suspicions, told myself I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining this. I had seen it with my own eyes. And that made it real. It made it undeniable. I had to face him. I had to know the truth. The next morning, when Gerald came downstairs, I pretended to be calm. I pretended that everything was fine, but inside my heart was racing. I had spent the entire night planning what I was going to say, rehearsing the words in my mind. But now that the moment was here, I wasn't sure I could go through with it. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood? What if all of this was just a misunderstanding? "Good morning, dear," I said, my voice sounding far too casual for what I was about to ask. He barely looked up from his coffee. He was distracted, like he usually was these days. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly as I set my own cup down. "Gerald," I said, my voice steadying, "I need to talk to you." He glanced at me briefly before going back to the newspaper. "Not now, Ellie, I'm busy," he mumbled, but I wouldn't let it go. "No, it's important," I said, my heart hammering in my chest. "I need to know what's going on." He set the newspaper down slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "What do you mean?" His voice was quiet, almost too quiet, like he knew something was wrong but wasn't ready to face it. I met his gaze, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in his composure. But there was nothing. He was calm, collected, as if he hadn't just poisoned me for God knows how long. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "Gerald," I said softly, "I know what you've been doing. I know what you've been putting in my coffee. I saw you, last night, in the kitchen. I saw you pour something into my cup. Why, Gerald? Why would you do that to me?" The words hit the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, there was only silence between us, thick and heavy. He didn't react right away. For a long, painful moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. My heart was in my throat, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he didn't. Finally, he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Ellie," he said, his voice low and calm, "you're imagining things. You must be mistaken. I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong." His words stung, more than I had expected. I wanted to scream, to accuse him of lying, but instead, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. Was he really lying, or was I seeing things that weren't there? "I'm not wrong, Gerald," I said, my voice trembling now. "I saw you. I saw what you did. Why are you doing this? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rubbed his eyes like he was tired, like he was trying to convince himself that this conversation wasn't happening. You need to rest, Ellie. You've been under so much stress. Maybe you need more of that medicine the doctor gave you. You're not thinking clearly. I could feel my resolve slipping. The doubt crept back in, filling the empty spaces in my mind. What if he was right? What if I was overreacting? Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But then I remembered the way my body felt every morning. The aching in my joints. The weakness in my muscles. I couldn't let him dismiss me anymore. I couldn't let him make me feel like I was crazy. I'm not imagining it, Gerald, I said, my voice shaking with emotion now. I know what I saw, and I need you to tell me the truth. What's going on? Why have you been so distant? Why have you been staying out late all the time? He looked away then, his expression hardening, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something cold, something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was frustration, like he had been caught in a trap he couldn't escape. Ellie, he said, his voice clipped, you're making a big deal out of nothing. There's nothing going on, I swear. But I could see it in his eyes. The lie was there, plain as day. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. Should I push him? Should I confront him further? Or should I leave it alone, keep pretending I didn't know what was really happening? I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, feeling torn in two. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand answers. But another part of me wasn't ready for the truth. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood? What if this wasn't the betrayal I thought it was? But deep down I knew I couldn't back down. I had already seen too much. I had already uncovered the truth. I couldn't let him keep lying to me. I couldn't stand it anymore. The waiting, the wondering, the confusion. I needed to know. I had seen the signs. Gerald's late nights, his strange behavior, the secretive way he moved around the house when he thought I was asleep. But seeing wasn't enough. I needed proof. I needed to be sure. So I made up my mind. I had to follow him. It wasn't easy. Every fiber of my being screamed at me not to do it, to turn back, to leave things alone. But the fear, the doubt, the pain, they were louder. I had already witnessed enough to know something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't just confront him on a hunch. I had to be sure. So, one evening, when Gerald got dressed for work, I pretended everything was normal. I made him his breakfast, handed him his lunch, kissed him on the cheek like I always did. But inside I was shaking. I had a plan. I waited until he left for work. Then I grabbed my coat, slipped out of the house, and got into my car. I followed him, trying to keep a safe distance, making sure he didn't notice me. It felt like the longest drive of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. Every street I turned down, every corner I rounded, I kept telling myself I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I had to know the truth. I had to see for myself what was really going on. Eventually, I watched as he pulled into the parking lot of a building I didn't recognize. He parked his car and walked toward the entrance, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. I waited for a moment, watching from my car, heart pounding in my chest. What was he doing here? Why wasn't he going to work like he said? I didn't wait long. I couldn't. My legs felt like they might give out under me, but I forced myself to move. I followed him at a distance, staying hidden behind parked cars, trying to stay out of sight. He walked into the building, and I stood there for a long moment, unsure whether to follow him inside. But I had to. I couldn't let him slip away again. I needed answers. Inside, the building was quiet, empty. I found a bench in the hallway and sat down, trying to control my breathing. What if he saw me? What if he knew I was here? But I stayed hidden, waiting, listening. My mind raced with every possibility. What was going on? What was he doing? I didn't have to wait long. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and I looked up. My heart stopped in my chest. Gerald was walking toward me, but he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, a woman I had never seen before. She was young, elegant, with a look in her eyes that I had never seen in Gerald's. They were laughing, talking like old friends, like they had all the time in the world. I could feel the blood drain from my face as I watched them. Who was she? What was going on? What had he been hiding from me? They entered a door at the end of the hall, and for a moment I thought I might faint. My hands were shaking. I couldn't move. I had to pull myself together. I waited a few minutes before getting up and slowly making my way toward the door they had gone through. I pressed my ear to it, trying to hear. I had to know. Through the thin walls, I could just make out their conversation. Gerald's voice was low, but the woman's was clear. She was laughing again, and I could hear Gerald's response. "Don't worry, Helena. Everything is going according to plan. She's still taking the pills. It'll take time. But soon enough, the doctors will confirm what we already know. There's nothing wrong with her. Just some stress, some fatigue. And when she's gone, we'll be able to start over." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard enough. My body went cold as I realized what he was saying. The plan, the pills, it was all a lie. He hadn't been trying to help me. He'd been slowly poisoning me to inherit everything, our house, our life insurance, everything I had worked for. And the woman, Helena, she was the one he was doing it for. It was all clear now. The late nights, the coldness, the distance. It wasn't just stress or fatigue. It was a deliberate plan to get rid of me. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to move. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I had to leave. I had to get out of there before they saw me, but I couldn't. I couldn't walk away from the truth. As I turned to leave, Gerald's voice rang out from behind the door. "This is what we agreed on, Helena," he said, his voice cold and steady. "She's not going to fight it. She trusts me, and soon she'll be gone. It's the only way." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My whole world had been shattered in an instant. Gerald, my husband, the man I loved, was planning to kill me, slowly, over time. And all for money, for a future with another woman. It was a betrayal beyond anything I had ever imagined. I left that building as quickly as I could, my mind spinning with the horror of what I had just learned. But there was no going back. I knew the truth now, and I couldn't let it stand. I had to confront him, no matter how terrifying it was. I had to face him and demand answers. That night, when Gerald came home, I was waiting for him. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I wasn't going to let him lie to me anymore. I had the truth now, and I couldn't let it go. I had to confront him. I had to make him face what he had done. That night, after I learned the truth, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt off its axis, like everything I had known, everything I had trusted, was crumbling around me. Gerald, the man I had given my heart to, the man I had built a life with, had betrayed me in the cruelest way. He wasn't just a husband. He was the one I had trusted with my future, my well-being, my very soul, and now everything felt like a lie. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, cold and calculating, as he poured that poison into my coffee. I could still hear his voice, so detached as he spoke with Helena, as if I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was deeper, like something inside me had been torn apart. It was a wound that went beyond the body. It was a wound to my heart. I had never imagined this. I never thought that someone I loved, someone I had trusted with my life, would ever do something so terrible. The betrayal was suffocating. It wasn't just the poison in my cup. It was the years of deceit, the silent disregard for my suffering. It was the lies he had told me every time he came home late, every time he dismissed my pain. He had chosen her. He had chosen a future with another woman over everything we had built together. And for what? For money? For security? For a chance at a new life? free of the wife who had grown weak in his eyes. I sat in the kitchen, the morning after everything came to light, staring at the untouched cup of coffee on the table. I wanted to drink it, to go back to the life I had known, but I couldn't, not anymore. The trust I had given him so freely, so completely was gone. It wasn't just the poison that had been slowly killing me. It was the slow death of trust, the slow death of everything I thought we had. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should stay or leave. My mind was a whirl of confusion and emotion. On the one hand, I had devoted so much of myself to this man, to this marriage. I had spent years caring for him, for us. But on the other hand, how could I stay with someone who had tried to destroy me so coldly, so methodically? How could I live with someone who had planned to kill me for his own gain? I thought about our life together, the years of shared moments, the laughter, the quiet nights by the fire. But then I remembered what he had done, what he had planned, and those memories felt like a cruel joke. How could I look at him the same way again? How could I ever trust him again? I thought about leaving. I thought about walking out the door and never looking back. But then I thought about everything we had built, our house, our life together. It was hard to let go. It was hard to walk away from a life I had worked so hard to create, even if that life had been built on lies. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to feel like a failure. But then again, was I failing by staying? Was I failing by pretending I could still love someone who had betrayed me so completely? I realized something that night. No matter how much pain I was in, no matter how deep the hurt went, I still had the power to choose. I didn't have to stay. I didn't have to let him continue poisoning my life, my heart, my soul. I could walk away. I could take control of my own future, no matter how hard it would be. And that's when I knew. I had to leave. I had to walk away from the man who had tried to kill me, both physically and emotionally. It wouldn't be easy. It would hurt more than anything I had ever known. But I had to do it. I had to save myself. The pain didn't go away overnight. It took time. It took a long time. But over the months that followed, I slowly started to rebuild. I found strength I never knew I had. I learned to live for myself again, to stand on my own 2 feet. I found the courage to be who I truly was, not defined by the lies he had told me, not defined by the years I had spent in the shadow of betrayal. And that's when I learned the most important lesson of all. Even in the deepest pain, we find the strength to rise. Even when the world falls apart, we have the power to put ourselves back together. The road ahead won't always be easy, but it's mine to walk, and no one can take that from me. So, I walk forward, one step at a time. With every step, I'm healing, and one day I'll look back at all of this, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because I survived, and that's more than I ever thought I could say. The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew deep down that I couldn't stay. Not with someone who had tried to destroy me, who had shown me that love could be twisted into something so cold and calculating. I had to leave. I had to take back control of my life. It was time to start over. The first few days were the hardest. I packed my things in silence, each item I placed in my suitcase carrying the weight of years of memories, some beautiful, some painful. But I couldn't keep holding on to them. I couldn't keep holding on to a life that had been built on lies. I left our home, the house we had made together. But it wasn't our home anymore. It was his, and I didn't belong there anymore. I moved into a small apartment in town. It was simple, but it was mine. The walls weren't decorated with our memories, but they were clean, free of the poison he had planted in every corner of that house. It felt strange at first, like I was living in someone else's life, but soon enough it began to feel like home. And slowly, I began to feel like myself again. The community here, they helped me. The neighbors, the people I had known for years. They were kind to me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. They brought me meals, offered support, and encouraged me to keep going. It was overwhelming at times, the kindness of strangers, but it was also healing. The support I found in them became the foundation for the life I was beginning to rebuild. I started volunteering at the local shelter for women, talking to women who had gone through the same things I had. At first, I was just listening, offering a kind word, a shoulder to lean on. But then something changed in me. I realized that I had a voice. I had a story, and maybe, just maybe, it could help others. I began speaking out. At first, it was small things. A conversation with a friend. A note of encouragement to a woman struggling with her own silent pain. But soon it became more. I spoke at community centers. I talked to groups of women who had been through hidden abuse. The kind of abuse no one talks about. The emotional abuse, the manipulation, the slow, silent destruction of trust and love. I shared my story, not for sympathy, but to let them know they weren't alone. I found purpose in that. I found strength in speaking the truth, in owning my story. It was scary at first to admit the depth of the pain I had been through, but each time I shared my truth, it felt like I was shedding a little more of the weight that had been dragging me down. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a voice for those who couldn't speak yet. It wasn't easy, though. The healing process is never linear. Some days the pain would creep back in, small reminders of the years I had lost, the life I had given up. There were days when I would cry, feeling like I was back at square one. But then I'd remember why I left. I'd remember that I was no longer his prisoner. I was free. The pain of betrayal didn't fade overnight. It never really disappears, does it? But with each passing day, it became easier to bear. I learned to take joy in the small things again. Taking walks in the park, reading a good book, watching the sun set over the horizon. I learned to find peace in the silence, to enjoy my own company, to love myself again. And that, I realized, was the greatest healing of all. I became stronger than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was thriving. And with every new day, I was building a new life, a life that was mine. A life that wasn't defined by the man who tried to destroy me, but by the woman I had become in spite of him. I started a new chapter, one where I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself, one where I wasn't afraid to speak the truth. And I found, in the process, that the more I helped others, the more I helped myself. The more I shared my story, the more I healed. And in that healing, I found a strength I never knew I had. A strength that came not from the man who had hurt me, but from the woman I had always been inside. So, here I am, living a life I never thought was possible. A life full of hope, full of purpose, and full of the kind of love that doesn't come with lies or poison. It comes with truth. It comes with trust. And it comes with the strength to rise no matter how many times life tries to knock you down. And to every woman out there who's struggling, who feels like she's drowning in her pain, I want you to hear me. You are stronger than you know. You are worth more than the lies they've told you. You can rebuild. You can rise, and you don't have to do it alone. Reach out. Speak your truth. And when you do, you'll find the strength to rise too. This is my story, but it's also your story. And together we can rise above the pain. We can reclaim our lives. As I sit here today, much older than I was when all of this began, I look back on everything that's happened. The pain, the betrayal, the confusion, the fear, it all seems like a lifetime ago. But it wasn't just the things that happened to me that have shaped who I am. It's how I chose to respond to them. That's what really mattered. I could have let that pain define me. I could have let Gerald's betrayal crush me, make me feel like I was nothing, like I wasn't worth fighting for. But I didn't. I chose to rise. I chose to reclaim my life, to rebuild it, piece by piece, with the strength that I didn't even know I had. And I've learned that it's not about what happens to us in life, but how we choose to respond. That's where our power lies. I learned to trust myself again. I learned to trust my own strength, my own ability to survive and to grow. I learned that we are never truly powerless, even in the face of the worst kinds of betrayal. The strength to rise is within all of us. We just have to find it. So, If you're watching this today and you're going through something difficult, something that feels impossible to overcome, I want you to hear me. You are not alone. You have the power to rise just like I did. You have the strength to move past your pain and create a life that is filled with hope, love, and peace. Don't let the darkness define you. Choose to step into the light. If my story has touched you, if it's inspired you, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this video. You never know who might need to hear it. You never know who might be struggling with the same pain, the same betrayal, and who might just need a reminder that they can rise above it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Together we can spread hope and strength, and together we can show the world that no matter what happens to us, we always have the choice to rise.